There are so many iterations of werewolf films that take the classic idea and spin it into different fantasies. But no matter how many I watch, the one that I always come back to is Ginger Snaps. Ginger Snaps holds a special place in my heart because it's not only a fun creature feature, it resonates on such a deeper level. It's a story about adolescence, transformation from girlhood to womanhood, puberty, teenage angst, and the body changing in ways that can't be controlled. The film follows two goth sisters, Ginger and Bridget, living in the quiet suburban town of Bailey Downs. They're obsessed with death and miserable in suburbia and completely inseparable. Early in the film, they literally make a pact to stay together forever, even joking that they'll die together if they never escape their town. And that relationship really becomes the emotional core of the entire movie. So one night while out getting revenge on a school bully, Ginger starts her first period, which triggers an attack by the creature responsible for a series of animal maulings around town. After being bitten, she slowly starts transforming into something monstrous, while her sister Bridget tries to save her. What's interesting is that the director has talked about how the menstruation metaphor wasn't entirely rigid at first, but just kind of naturally surfaced during the writing process. Once they connected the idea of lunar cycles and menstrual cycles, the movie shifted from being a mythological creature into something more biological and grounded in bodily experience. The werewolf curse becomes less about fantasy and more about puberty, identity, hormones, sexuality, and emotional transformation. It's horror rooted in something painfully human, which is why I adore this movie so much. And that's what makes Ginger Snaps feel so different from most werewolf films, because at the time, it was really rare to see a female monster story told from the monster's perspective like this one. Most women in horror were still framed primarily as victims or filtered through the final girl trope, but Ginger Snaps puts that female monster at the center and allows her transformation to really drive the emotional core of the story. The horror also feels very domestic. It's suburban neighborhoods, high school hallways, bedrooms, Halloween decorations, and sterile homes. The setting makes everything feel less like mythology and more like a lived experience. And I really love how gradual Ginger's transformation is throughout the film. She has hair growing from her wounds, her nails are changing, a tail slowly starts forming, her hair is changing color, the way her body starts becoming unfamiliar to her feels very reminiscent of The Fly in terms of execution. And then there's that incredible hallway scene at school. It's right before Ginger fully starts resembling a werewolf and she suddenly becomes striking and magnetic. She walks through the hallway with that gray streak in her hair, everybody's staring at her differently, and for the first time she realizes that she has power. And it's honestly one of my favorite scenes in the movie because it captures that complicated relationship between femininity and confidence, sexuality, and also social perception. The film constantly connects the transformation to menstruation and bodily autonomy and the way society treats teenage girls. Specifically, patriarchy and sexism and misogyny. A lot of what this film is doing is it's a representation of what women go through in a world that centers men and a society that is built for men and how women suffer in that system. And I just think that what's really interesting is that the movie contrasts Ginger's transformation with Jason's, because Jason's character, he performs masculinity around other people. He talks about sex, objectifies girls, acts overly confident and egotistical. He's the typical representation of toxic masculinity and the boys will be boys type character. And once he gets infected after sleeping with Ginger, we can kind of get a glimpse of the male transformation versus the female. His transformation is a bit different from hers. His happens really fast and almost chaotic. He gets acne, he becomes aggressive, impulsive, and really angry. He basically turns into this exaggerated stereotype of a testosterone-fueled teenage boy. And his characterization kind of reflects a satirical portrayal of adolescent male sexual confidence and entitlement. Meanwhile, Ginger's transformation is framed almost like a glow up at first. She becomes really confident, more sexual, more powerful and beautiful. And I just think it's such an interesting contrast between male and female adolescents and the different ways society expects boys and girls to experience puberty or power, or even how each navigates it. At its core, this film is really about the trauma of female puberty, especially during a time when that wasn't commonly portrayed with this level of honesty or body horror. And another part of this film that I love so much is the mother character, Pamela. I think that her character is so interesting. She lives in this almost artificial suburban denial while horrific things are happening around her. She's focused on cleaning bloodstains and maintaining appearances, decorating the house for Halloween, gardening, baking, trying to preserve this perfect image of domestic normalcy, while her daughter is literally turning into a monster. Even her wardrobe tells you who she is. The cheerful sweaters, the seasonal earrings, decorative vests. She almost feels like a parody of suburban motherhood. But what makes her interesting is that eventually that facade breaks. Once she finally understands what's happening, she becomes protective in this really unexpected way. And one of my favorite moments is when she says, "First thing tomorrow, I'll let the house fill up with gas and I'll light a match." She's suddenly willing to destroy the house and her marriage and her entire suburban life to protect her daughters. And in that moment, the illusion kind of collapses. And there's also a really interesting line from Ginger that honestly feels like the thesis statement of this whole movie. She says, "No one ever thinks chicks do shit like this. A girl can only be a slut, a bitch, a tease, or the virgin next door." And I think that that line perfectly captures what the film is exploring. It's talking about the rigid roles that are assigned to women, the way female sexuality is monitored and categorized and feared, because ultimately Ginger Snaps is a film about how society constructs women's bodies and sexuality as something dangerous or monstrous. And what makes the movie so brilliant is how subversive it is while still being genuinely entertaining. It's funny and violent, tragic, emotional, and deeply female-centered in a genre that rarely prioritized that perspective at the time. And underneath all of that body horror and satire, the movie is ultimately a tragedy. Because at the center of everything is the relationship between Ginger and Bridget. The director has even described the film as a love story between sisters. The emotional core isn't really about monsters, it's about watching someone you love slowly become unreachable. And that's why the ending of this movie hits so hard, because at the end it stops feeling like a horror movie entirely. It becomes a story about losing your sister, about realizing you can't save someone from becoming a different person. And the final tragedy is that the pact they made at the beginning of the film completely falls apart. The horror fades away and what's left is the grief. But when Ginger Snaps originally released, it didn't find immediate commercial success due to its limited release, but over time, especially through HBO airings and DVDs, it slowly built a massive cult following. And I think the reason this film continues resonating is because everybody understands some version of transformation. Everybody remembers adolescence and discomfort, alienation, body changes, and feeling trapped inside yourself. And as a trans woman, that aspect of the film resonates with me really deeply. The body horror, the repression, transformation, being othered, and being disconnected from your own body can all read through a queer lens in ways that feels incredibly personal. Overall, Ginger Snaps is one of the most unique and emotionally intelligent werewolf films ever made. It's funny and tragic and disturbing, and still one of the best portrayals of girlhood and bodily transformation the horror genre has ever produced. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.